What I want to accomplish tonight is to show you how this book, what's this book? Good. It's not the 9th Harry Potter book. Good. All right. It's the Bible. True. This book is reliable. Now, what do I mean by reliable? You can trust it. You can trust it because somebody comes up to you and says, why do you believe in Jesus Christ? And you'll say, well, the Bible says. And people say, why does the Bible say? How can you trust the Bible? And you go, because. And then they'll say, well, you know, people trust the Book of Mormon because. And people trust the Quran because. And you're like, what makes the Bible so different?
It's the oldest book.
Okay, but does the oldest mean it's true? Maya, what do you got to say? It makes sense, okay. But what if you come into a Muslim who says, well, the Quran makes sense to me? What? It was written by the Holy Spirit. It was written by the Holy Spirit, but the Quran was written by Muhammad, who was a prophet. What are you going to say?
We have a lot of evidence, historical and eyewitness and all that other fun stuff.
Yes, we do. What? Manuscripts. We're going to get into that. Material, yes. Manuscripts. Okay, we're going to get into that tonight. Okay, all right. Let me ask you a question. Okay, so we're dealing with the Bible. How can you know the Bible is reliable? Well, let me throw this out there. Who was the first official president of the United States? How do you know that? Because it's written in the history books. Who was the 16th president of the United States? And what happened to him? How do you know that? History. There was a movie. Who said that? Right? There was a movie.
It's on the internet.
Who's this about? Okay. All right. Who's the author? This is called a biography. What's a biography? Okay. Yeah, somebody's life written by somebody else. What is somebody's life written by that somebody called? Autobiography. Very good. You guys are going to school. You're learning stuff. Okay, so who wrote this biography?
Benjamin P. Thomas.
Benjamin P. Thomas. Now, how do we know that Mr. Thomas knew what to write? He did research. Okay, what did he research? The Internet. The almighty Internet. It's all on the Internet. But the thing is, everything's on the Internet. The Bible's on the Internet. The Quran's on the Internet. Religions we've never even heard of are on the Internet. So if it's on the Internet, it must be true. There's no such place as Wyoming. Just stop and think. Have you met anybody from Wyoming? There you go. There you go. No, you haven't. You just think you have. No, it's a joke. It's a joke. Okay. The point being, just because it's on the Internet doesn't make it true. Just because it's a part of my history class that I took, and some professor stood up here like me and told you that Abe Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth. What does that mean? How do we know? How do we know? Well, we know by manuscripts. Manuscripts.
That's how we know John Wilkes Booth was when they killed Abraham Lincoln.
Exactly. It was written down. It was reported. It was, well, I mean, they had the printing press by then, but newspapers reported that John Wilkes Booth had shot Abraham Lincoln. You had eyewitnesses that were interviewed, and it was all written down. So the question then becomes, how do we know what was written down is true? Okay. What? Witnesses. You had first-hand accounts. Okay, none of us, were you alive during Abe Lincoln's... If anyone was alive during Abe Lincoln, I believe that it would be Dave. Yes, no, none of us were alive. None of us saw the first president of the United States. So we have to trust what has been documented throughout history. Your history books. You guys had to go to school? You have a history book? Okay. No? You guys did go to school? You had a history book? Okay. That history book was written based on manuscripts, based on journals, based on letters, based on eyewitness recorded accounts, and was put together succinctly so that you could study history. I won't get into the argument of whether it's been changed or not, but just trust it right now, that it has been put together based on documents, based on manuscripts, based on all kinds of evidence from eyewitnesses and other things. Okay, let me throw something else out there. We have the original manuscript of the Constitution of the United States. Do you know that? We still have that, right? We have the original manuscript. Now, that is pretty cool because did you know that the Bible is a collection of manuscripts? Every book of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Song of Solomon, all of these books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are a collection of manuscripts. When Jesus was alive, did they have the printing press? How did they record things?
On a rock.
On papyrus. Very good. Well, yeah, they did rocks in Moses' day. True. On papyrus. Yeah, they wrote things down. Very good. They wrote things down by hand. In fact, the Jews had a whole sect of people called scribes, and that's all they did was write things down. How would you like to be your job? You wake up 9 to 5? Write. That's your job. Some of you hate writing. Show your hands. Who hates writing? I mean, some of you, yeah, really? Okay. Writing is fun. Anyway, but here's the thing. You ready? We do not have any originals. In other words, when John wrote the Gospel of John, he actually held a charcoal pen and papyri and wrote the Gospel of John. We don't have that. Why? Wait a minute. We don't have that actual physical manuscript that he touched. Why? No. What? It deteriorates. The original manuscripts would be 2,000 years old. They would have deteriorated over time. What do we have then? We have what people copied. So somebody took John's manuscript, copied it down. And then somebody took that manuscript, copied it down. And then somebody took that manuscript and copied it down. So we have copies of John's manuscript. Does that worry anybody? Put on that slide. You can go here, which is somewhere. Hang on. It's the National Archives building in Washington, D.C., and you can see the actual Constitution of the United States. This is the paper that our forefathers actually, literally put their hands on. We can see the originals, and we can know that's exactly what was written in our Constitution. But you can't do that with the Bible. You can't... Man, go ahead.
It's not relevant.
Oh, it's not relevant. Oh, you're going to make a joke? Yeah. That's okay, we'll come back to that joke. All right, you can't do that with the Bible. You can't take the original copy of the book of John that John actually touched and wrote and look at it because it's been deteriorated thousands of years or a couple thousand years ago. It's gone. So does that make anyone nervous? How do we know what John actually wrote? How do we know the copies haven't been messed with? As some people will tell you they have been. All right. We have copies. We have handwritten copies of the original work. Show that next slide. There we go. Who can read that?
Nope.
That is a fragment, triangle, yeah. That is a fragment of the book of Mark. That is a fragment of a very old manuscript, a very old fragment of the book of Mark. We have many of those, and we have put together what we believe Mark actually wrote. We don't have the actual one that he touched when he wrote, but we have copies of the book of Mark. And they look kind of like that.
You know what that says?
Look what it's put together with. Look what it's held together with. Does that make you feel good? Is anyone worried about their Bible right now? All right, good deal. Yeah, Maya was like, a little bit, yeah. Okay, good. We have handwritten copies of the original manuscript. So how can I trust the Bible? Okay, when you examine old manuscripts, did you guys know that there are people with lots of letters after their last name who spend their life studying old junk? Some of it's junk, some of it's biblical manuscripts. Did you guys know that? There are people who study those things. They study old manuscripts of all kinds. Manuscripts of the Bible, manuscripts of other histories, all kinds of manuscripts. They just study and study. They love this stuff, okay? I actually think it's kind of cool. But a lot of people think it's dusty and boring, but I actually kind of think it's cool. They spend their lives doing this. And when you do this, when you study a manuscript, you have to ask yourself two questions. The first is, what is the gap between the original manuscript and the most recent copy? Okay, hang on with me. The original's gone, right? But we know roughly about when it was written. So what is the gap between that original manuscript when it was written and the earliest copy that we have? And if you can get, honestly, within a couple hundred years, that's pretty good. So if you're studying Caesar and some of the writings that he had about his life, and you've got a couple 100 years between the original manuscript was written and the first copy that we actually have, that's actually not too bad. That's fairly accurate, you can say. All right? So what's the gap between the original manuscript and the most recent copy? Show that next slide, Trent. All right. So I want to show you guys something. So you have Caesar and his histories. You have Plato. Who was Plato? A philosopher. Very good. You have Thucydides. Who was he? He was an old Greek historian. You have Tacitus. Who was he? He was a Greek senator and also a historian. You have Suetonius. Thank you. I looked up the pronunciations too. Suetonius, and it was a Roman historian. And you have Homer.
Simpson.
Not Simpson. Homer. What?
I said he gave the Greeks their gods.
He gave the Greeks their gods. Yeah, Homer wrote something you might know. It's called the Iliad and the Odyssey. Yes. All right. So you have all these guys and their ancient writings. Look, all of them wrote on papyrus, just like the apostles did who wrote the New Testament. All of them wrote on papyrus. Here you have about the year they were written and a fragment of the earliest copies. So look at Caesar. Okay? I know, hang on to this. Some of this is a little technical, and you're like, my brain's turned off because I'm not in school anymore. Turn your brain back on just for a second. All right? So, Caesar's histories were written between 140 to 44 BC. The earliest copy that we have is from AD 900. There's a gap of about 1,000 years from the original copy to the earliest one that we have. Everything else has been lost, has been rotted away, okay? You got that? That's not too bad. 1,000 years? That's not too bad, okay? Plato, you've got about 1,200-year gap. Thucydides, you've got 1,300 gap. Tacitus, 1,000 years gap. Suetonius, you have about 800 years. Homer, who wrote the Iliad, which, by the way, is a work of fiction. All these guys are historians. He wrote fiction. You've got about a 500-year gap between when he wrote it and the earliest copy that we have. Okay? That's pretty good. You want to see the New Testament? Trent. The New Testament. Written between 40 and 100 AD. 125 year. This is the earliest copy that we have. By the way, that's shrinking. They're finding earlier copies all the time. 25 to 50 years.
How are they finding more copies?
Oh, they're finding all kinds of stuff. There's archaeological digs going on in Qumran and in different areas in Israel, and they're finding things all the time. There's new discoveries being made all the time. 25 to 50 years between when the original was written down and the earliest copy that we have compared to everything else. Sir?
How do they know that the fragments they find are from the year they was from?
Good question. Okay, they know. So styles of writing, they can detect what styles were popular in what years through research and years and years and years of research. So you know how if you pick up an old book and you open up to a chapter and the first letter is kind of very artsy and calligraphical and then the rest of it's like type. Okay, people did that stuff, that kind of thing, similar kind of things, way back when. And so you can compare how it was written, you can compare the style it was written, and you can judge about what time, what year it was written. Does that make sense?
Would you be making an assumption?
You would be making an educated guess based upon what you've all researched. So you have all this research. Go ahead.
Yes, but you have to have a standard to compare it with.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So you're saying that I think this was written in 1970 based on the way this looks because people wrote like that in 1970.
Sure.
You have to have that standard that knows that people wrote
Sure.
like that in 1970.
Sure. And that standard comes through years and years of research. It also depends on where they found it. It also depends on how the papyrus was made. It was changed over the years as they figured out how to make it better. You take all of that and they can calculate about when. So it's not carbon dating, but you can calculate about when it was written. Also, what's the content? Because if you find it's a lot of like what the historical content is, sometimes you can narrow about when it was written. Or sometimes, if like in the Old Testament, if it says, between the king so and so and so and so, you at least know where the original is. Yes.
I know about the Old Testament.
The Old Testament. Okay, we'll get to that. We'll focus on the New Testament. We will get to the Old Testament. Okay, New Testament. So the New Testament, the only one that comes close is Homer. Between when the original was made and the first earliest copy. And here's the funny thing. You talk to a historian, if you were to tell a historian, I don't think what we have now was originally what Homer wrote down, he would laugh at you. If you went to a historian today and he said, you know what, I think the manuscripts that we have of the Caesar and his wars that we have today, I don't think it was originally what was written down, he would laugh at you. And yet, people will say the New Testament is unreliable. So you had to ask 2 questions. Number 1, what is the gap between the original manuscript and the earliest one they have? The second question, how many manuscripts of this work do we have? Because the more manuscripts you have, the more you can research and try to reconstruct the original. Does that make sense? So, let's go to the next slide. Of Caesar and his wars, we have 10 manuscripts that exist today. Plato, we have 7. Thucydides, 8. 20. 8. Look at Homer. People love fiction. We have 643 manuscripts of Homer's Iliad. And no one will question these. No one will tell you we don't know what they originally wrote down. They'll tell you we can come between 95 to 98% of what was originally written down. We know what they originally wrote. How many manuscripts do you think the New Testament has? Do we have combined? What?
2,500.
2,500. 1,200. No, you don't answer. You don't get it. You don't get to. 5. 7. All the manuscripts that we have of the New Testament equal to 24,000. That's the entire thing. Like, we don't have 24,000 copies of the book of Matthew. But we have, over the course of the entire New Testament, we have 24,000. It's actually over 24,000 now of the entire New Testament. And that includes some fragments, because you have broken particles of manuscripts. And then some you have full manuscripts of entire books. But calculated together, we have 24,000 manuscripts that support the New Testament.
I'm sorry, I think I find this stuff interesting.
Yeah, I do too.
For Homer, do they have 643 full manuscripts of both the Iliad, or do they have...
That's a good question. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did. I'll have to look into that. It's a good question.
Because it was one book, right? As opposed to...
The Odyssey was one and the Iliad was another.
Right.
Man.
Where do they have these? Like the...
Museums, collectors, places like that. Not that I'm aware of. Maybe in Chicago, maybe. Maybe in the Creation Museum. Yeah, I'd have to look that up. That's a really good question, though. That's a really good question. Sir?
Is there any variance between the main...
Ha! Come on, let's do it. All right, very nice, very nice. Okay. So what this? Let me get to that for just a second. So what this means is, we can take the 24,000 copies of the New Testament. We can compare all of them that we have together, and we can accurately construct the New Testament the way it was originally written. Are there some questions? Absolutely. Yes, Lord. Okay, let's get. Blah, 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 blah. All right, next slide. What about textual variants? What's a textual variant?
Variations in text.
Oh, my goodness. You're all over this. Okay, variations in text. Now, this means that you have 2 of the same letter, and in one particular verse, there's a little bit of a difference. Okay? One says one thing, one says something slightly different. Let me give you an example. Okay, so this comes from 2 Peter 1:21. You have some manuscripts in this verse. You have some manuscripts that have one word, the word for holy, which is hagia, and you have some manuscripts that have the preposition apa. Okay, this is all Greek, so hang on, all right? You see how they kind of look similar. What some people think happened, because some manuscripts have this word, apa, which means from, and some manuscripts have hagia, which means holy. That's 2 different concepts. Some people think that maybe a scribe got sloppy and combined the gamma and the iota and made it look like a P. That's Greek, don't worry about it. But the words can kind of look similar. You know, if you've ever written something and you run your words together and it doesn't look quite like it's supposed to, that may have happened with some of the scribes. So, basically, this would make the verse say, but holy men of God spoke, whereas this would make it say, but men spoke from God. Now, that's a little bit different. And you'll have things like that in the manuscripts. You'll have what's called textual variances, where the verses look a little bit different. And this actually is one of the bigger textual variances, because you're taking the word holy, the adjective, and you're changing it to a preposition. But let me ask you a question. Does it change the meaning? It's still, the verse is still saying men spoke of God or from God. It doesn't change the meaning of the verse. And this is the thing with the textual variants, because people told me this. The Bible's full of errors. They've got all kinds of textual variants in it. Well, here's the thing. None of the textual variants change the meaning of the verse. Most of the textual variants, are you ready for this? Most of them are spelling differences. One spells John, John. One spells John, John. Does it change the meaning? You will never find a textual variant that says Jesus is the Son of God and one that says Jesus is not the Son of God. You will not find that in the Bible. Now, there are some places where people argue over, well, which one was original, and we don't necessarily know which one was original. Those are very, very few verses, but none of them change the meaning of the New Testament. None of it make it to where we can doubt the New Testament. Does that make sense? Anyone scared? Victoria.
I'm not scared.
You're not scared. You have a question. Go for it.
So when Jehovah's Witnesses say that, like,
Yes.
in John 1:1, don't they like when it says, help me, please?
Yeah, Jesus, no, thank you. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't they say, like, it was from God?
I've seen one where it said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was like God.
Like God.
Or the Word was a God. Another one of their translations will say. That has been changed, and actually, if you go take them back to the original Greek, you'll show them that's not there. The actual...
I didn't know if that was a variant.
No.
Yeah.
That's an addition. Thank you. That is something they changed. Which, by the way, you'll know from 2 weeks ago, we read about in Revelation that anyone who changed God's Word was... That's right. Not a good thing. Yes, sir.
Is there any, like, it probably have to be in Greek or whatever, but is there anywhere, like, a study Bible or a resource that points out all the differences?
Yes. You want to see it? It's on my phone. I'll show you afterwards.
Yeah.
It's fun. And there's a lot of them. And it kind of can seem scary, but like I said, most of them are spelling changes, or one of them might add the word the, whereas another one does not add the word. A lot of them are just so explainable.
They come from a database of, like, just that somebody has compiled with historians.
Tony and I use a program called Logos, which is massive, and it has commentaries and books and Greek and all kinds of fun stuff.
Sweet.
So this is textual variants. Don't let them scare you. Next time somebody says to you, "Well, the Bible has all kinds of errors in it," you go, "Yeah, you know what those errors are? Spelling differences. Booyah! What you got?" No. All right. So we say all this. Now, I want you, if you haven't done so already, turn to John 21:24. If you have a Bible, turn to John 21:24. This is so significant because we can trust our Bible. And John 21:24, if you don't have a Bible, listen to this. John 21:24 says, "This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written about these things, and we know that his testimony is true." John wrote and said, "I know my testimony is true," and we can know that John knew it was true and that he wrote it down accurately based upon the manuscript evidence of the New Testament. So what I want to leave you with, guys, with is an assurance that the New Testament is what was written down. You can trust it. Now, somebody brought up the Old Testament. The Old Testament is a little bit different because the Old Testament goes back longer than the New Testament, and much of what they have has been lost. But here's an interesting thing. I don't have the dates, okay? But we copied our Old Testament from some very, very, very old manuscripts. Long time ago. And then, in help me, Katie, not Quran, but the caves. 1956?
I have no clue.
I think it was the Dead Sea Scrolls. 1940s, right? Okay. Something like that. In the 19-something. some shepherd threw a rock into some caves and heard something break, and they went in there and they found a bunch of scrolls, and they compared, and later on they were discovered, they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. They compared those to what we had of the Old Testament, and the changes were so slight, and they were thousands of years later, because the scribes took such care in copying down the Old Testament. So even though we don't have all the manuscript evidence that we do for the New Testament, we have a thousands of year gap, and then what we do have was changed extremely different, extremely similar to what they had back then. So there's a lot of trust in the Old Testament as well. Should get more details on that for you, but I don't have them. Ma'am? Oh, you're just, okay. Questions? Question? Where's my seat? Where's my seat? Thank you.
I assume there is manuscript evidence of the Old Testament, just not as much.
Correct. Not as much, but the gap that we have from old to not so old, the comparison is strikingly similar. Yes, ma'am.
So didn't like when Jesus was walking the earth, didn't they have copies of the Old Testament?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They had scribes that's all they did all day long was just copy the Old Testament, copy the Old Testament, copy the Old Testament,
When
and there.
did Moses write the Torah, the first 5 books or whatever?
Sometime when he was alive,
So, when was he alive though? So that's how many?
3500 BC or something like that. Yeah.
BC. So the thing is, even if we had it from Jesus' time, it's still, a 35.
It would be a huge gap.
Yeah.
It would be a huge gap. But the other thing about the Old Testament, the scribes were so precise.
Yeah.
They would actually copy the Old Testament 3 letters at a time. Some scribes, depending on which ones you were. So like they would not go, in the beginning God created. They would go INT HEB. They would copy it.
More dangerous because you could easily lose your place.
You-
By, saying
There's no spaces in Greek, is there?
The originally, no, yes.
responding.
Okay, go for it.
Because I also find this really fascinating. So there were scribes had overseers, and so then, or in general, what they would do is that they knew how many letters were in each line, and so then they would count the letters at the end of each line, and so then they would know, like, oh, this is supposed to have 26 letters, and there's 27, or there's 25, and so then they would go back and they'd have to start in the
Yep.
beginning. The other side of that is also, like, there are instances where, when it comes to studying textual variants and stuff like that, where you have, so like the phrase at the end of each verse and God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good. There's instances like that in the New Testament as well, and where you'll see a scribe, their eye fell on the wrong line, and
Yes.
they'll repeat it or they skipped, but because of they have the manuscript measured out, there's times where they catch it, and so then and there's times where they didn't, where they wrote the same line again, and so then but because of the numerous amount of manuscripts that we have, we can go, oh, that was a scribal error. It's really supposed to say this because there's 5 other versions of this that we have, 5 other copies, and all of them do it this way, and this one does it this
Yep.
way. So this scribe made a mistake, and so that's one of the other ways that we assess it.
True that.
I'm talking too much.
You're right.
Is there, like, books in the New Testament that we have more manuscripts of than others, I assume?
Yes. I couldn't tell you which, but yes. Brad, that was slow. He was like, I think I have a question. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Are you going to do a message on the canon of Scripture?
Sure.
I'll hold my questions. It's kind of off topic, but
All right, cool. Any other questions? All right. It's not raining cats and dogs like it was. So, guys,
Just cats.
just cats. So, guys, we're going to have to be bold and head over and do our breakout time. So, go.